Hello, my name is Jeremy, and today we're going to take a look at the 1999 winner of the Spiel des Jahres. This is the 34th in my series of Spiel des Jahres winners, and today's game is Tikal. And this is designed by my favorite design team of Wolfgang, Kramer, and Michael Kiesling. The game is a relatively heavy strategy game by the standards of the Spiel des Jahres winners. It plays in about 60 to 90 minutes for 2 to 4 players, but it's a game that I think has a great open-ended structure and a lot of depth. In it, players are going to be playing explorers who are moving across a jungle by drawing tiles and completing the map of the game board, and basically racing each other to pick up treasures and contesting each other to explore temples and try to have the majority of explorers working there so they get credit for exploring at the times that the scoring rounds are going to come up, which is somewhat random over the course of the game. So let me take a moment or two to show you how the game plays, and then I'll come back and let you know what I think about it. So a 2-player game in progress of Tikal might look something like this. This would be several turns into the game. The game involves players sending out these tokens which stand for explorers as they move through this jungle, discover these temples which are printed on these tiles like this, and also treasures which will be placed as tokens on these tiles when they're flipped up. Over the course of the game, there are going to be several scoring rounds which are going to occur as a volcano tile is drawn, and then at that point players will score for having majority position within each temple, and then also for having collected these treasure tokens, which will look like that. So the way that the game plays is actually quite unique. Each player is going to be given this chart, which essentially shows you a menu of options that you have over the course of the game, and you'll get 10 action points, they're called, and you could spend them in these various ways over the course of the game. So each round, what you're going to do first is you're going to draw a tile, and a player will simply take a tile, and these tiles are labeled with the letters A through G, and you'll stack them in order with A on top and then going down all the way to G. And when this stack of tiles runs out, the game will have one final round and a final scoring for each player. So this is also a game timer. But on a player's turn, the first thing they do is draw and place a tile. So these tiles could be 3 different types. They could show just jungle, which is like this, which is essentially an empty tile, but it has these stairs on it. They could be treasure tiles, which are these types of tiles here. And when you draw those, you will place a number of treasure tokens on them from the supply, equal to the number of gold mass that you see on there. Or you could draw these temple tiles, and these will be of a certain value, and those values will go up as you work your way through the stack, and that will indicate how many points that temple will be worth if you control the majority at the end of end of your scoring round. So this player's drawn this tile, and they could place it anywhere that they want on the board that's adjacent to an existing tile, or what they could do is that they could but the way that they place it has to be a valid placement. So for example, if they placed it here, that would not be valid, because you'll notice that these tiles have on the edges these stairs, and that will indicate the number of movement points that it takes to move from one tile to the next. You add up the stairs on the adjacent sides of both hexes, and that will be the number of movement points it requires. So here there would be no stairs and no way currently to get to this tile, so that would not be a valid placement. But here that would be a valid placement, and it would cost 1 movement point to move from here to here, because on this side here there are 0 and on this side there are 1. So let's just say that this player does that. Now they will get to do their 10 action points using this card. If the player had drawn a volcano tile, there would be a scoring phase, but that did not happen here. So these actions are relatively simple once you understand them, but there are a lot of them, and that does make this game sometimes slow down a little bit as players think about their myriad options. But the way that the actions work are that you could move a figure, and it will take 1 movement point to move a figure 1 space for each of these stairs that's shown. So for example, if I wanted to move this figure to here, that would take 1 action point. And usually it's helpful if you keep some tokens or what have you around to keep track of the action points as players spend them. So just using cubes or pennies or whatever is usually a good idea. The next option is to bring a player onto the board, and that will take 1 action point. And you, at the beginning of the game, could just bring them onto this base camp, but, and let me hop down to this one here, if you set up a new tent, which costs 5 action point, and you could do that on the tiles like this, that would cost 5 action points. You could then choose to make your new guy come out here, and that would still cost 1 action point. So as you explore deeper into the jungle, you'll want to set up new base camps so that you'll not have to trek all the way through the jungle. And for 1 action point, you could also move this guy from this camp to this camp, so you could teleport from one camp to the next camp for an action point as well. So the next thing that you could do, these two actions are rather similar. They are to excavate a temple, which basically means to do more exploration there and make the temple more valuable, or to excavate treasures. And excavating a temple costs 2 action points. Excavating a treasure costs 3 action points. And the way that that works is, for excavating a temple, for each figure that you have on the temple, you could do it once, and you could do it a maximum of 2 times during your turn. And all that you do there is you spend your 2 action points to upgrade the number on the temple. And you can only do that if in the supply of tiles here, and you can see they go from 2 all the way up to 10, there's only 1 10, but there are a lot of 5s, and then it gets successively less over the course of the game. To upgrade a temple, you simply spend your action points, and that figure will basically excavate that temple. So for example, you would upgrade this 2 to a 3, making this worth 3 points during a majority scoring, and again, that will take 2 of your action points. This player could also do it over here, upgrade this 1 to a 2, but again, they can only do that 2 times, and no figure could do that twice during a turn. Now, if both of these figures had been here, they could use their first one to upgrade it to a 3, their second one to upgrade it to a 4, and that would be valid. So excavating treasures from these treasure tokens that are placed on the board works similarly. And the way that that works is, again, you could do it up to 2 times during a turn, and you can only do it once per figure at a given space per turn. So, for example, if this figure moved here, again, that would cost 1 movement point because there's 1 step connecting these 2 areas. Then they could spend 3 movement points to simply take the top tile here and add it to their personal supply of tiles, and those will score you points at the end of the scoring rounds, these tiles that you've collected. The next option that they could do is simply swap tiles with another player, and this is not something that could be blocked by other players directly, and it costs 3 action points to do that. And the reason why you might want to do that is because, as you can see here at the bottom, these tokens, there's 3 of each type in the game, and collecting full sets makes them more valuable. So if you have 1 token of a type, it's only worth 1 point. If you have 2 matching tokens, they're worth 3 points, and if you have 3 matching tokens, they are worth 6 points every scoring. So if this player had this set of tokens here, and then this player over here had this number of tokens here, you see that this player has this statue here, which this player might want. For 3 action points, they could swap this here, so that you do a swap of 1 tile for 1 tile, and now this player has a pair. So that would be 3 action points. If another player already has a pair or a triplet within a given type, you cannot do a swap. You can only swap 1 for 1. If this player has 1 of a type and this player has 1 of a type, you could do a swap. Then the next action that's possible, like I said, you could set up base camp, which I just depicted here. That costs 5 action points. And finally, you can choose to cap off a temple. So this player here has spent time upgrading this temple, and they might want to protect it from other players. And the way that this is going to work, this capping off a temple, is going to be, you could only do it, first of all, twice during a game. Not just during a round, but during the entire game. But what you do is you spend the 5 action points, as shown on here, and in an area where you have the majority of workers, so here this player has 2 versus none, although if this player had 1 here, that you could still do it, you would then spend your 5 action points to basically place one of these workers onto the temple, which guarantees you the majority in that for the rest of the game. Any other workers in your color that you have in the game, or on that space, are going to get taken out of the game entirely, so it is a very expensive move. And the other workers here, they would never be able to claim these points. You've just locked that down. These workers for other players would not be removed. They just would not be able to score here, so they would just essentially need to move. And those are essentially all of the actions that you're going to be able to perform on your turn, and you're going to use your 10 action points to pick from that menu of actions. And that's how the turns are going to play out. So then, it would be the next player's turn, and they would just draw a tile. Here, again, they've drawn one of these tiles with treasures on it, so they would place 4 treasures onto there because there are 4 symbols on there, and then they would take 10 action points. And this will keep going with each player drawing a tile, executing their 10 action points, and then it going to the next player until a player draws a volcano tile. And look at that, I got one, lucky me. So the way that this works is that there's going to be a scoring round, and a scoring round is basically a full round without tile placement. So this player who drew the volcano tile will hold on to that tile for a moment, and now there's going to be a scoring round. So each player is going to not draw a tile and get 10 action points in turn order, starting with the player whose turn it was. So this, if the red player drew this, they would get 10 action points. Basically, they could use their action points to try to position people, bring new people in, so that they will get majority in as many spaces as possible. Perhaps they would want to claim this extra token before that scoring happened. And then that player alone will score all of their points. So in this case, the red player here, they've capped this off. They would get 4 points for that because it's been increased to value 4. Here they have a 1-point temple. Here they have a 1-point temple. Both of those are uncontested. Here they have 3 figures versus this, which is essentially each player has one of these larger octagons, and they serve as a camp leader or an expedition leader, and they count as 3. So here, this player's 3 small pawns are equivalent to this player's 3 value large pawn. So in a case of a tie, nobody gets any points for that temple. So that would not score that player anything. Here they get 1 point. And then you would look at their set of collected tokens so far. So for example, this player, they have a set of 2, which is worth 3, and then they have a single one, which is worth 1. So they get 4 points for those. 1, 2, 3, 4. And that would be their scoring round. Then they would go on to the orange player, who would get a similar 10 action points to move over workers and whatnot. So they could, go here, collect 2 of these tokens, for example, or maybe bring in this worker over here, since he's not doing any good here. So he would now get majority here, and then he would score. So he now would get 2 points for that because he's taken the majority, and then he would tally up all of his tokens. So he has quite a few. So these 2 would be a pair. And unfortunately, all of the others are single. There are a lot of different types. So this would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 points more in addition to those 2. So that would bring that player up to 10. And that's how a scoring round would work. And then after every player's had a chance to use their 10 action points and score, it would go back to the normal round for the player who drew the volcano tile. They would place that volcano tile as if they were placing any other tile. And essentially this works as a blocker. It does not, you cannot move on to the volcano tile. So they would just place that again adjacent to other tiles, and then they would take their normal turn. So this is how the game's going to work until you work through the entire pile. And again, over the course of the game, these temples will have higher starting values. And then after the player has drawn and placed the last tile, every player will get a scoring phase, just like I just described, with 10 action points, no tile draw, and scoring their own points. Whoever has the most points at the end of the game is going to win. All right, so that is Tikal, and this is, like I said, a game that's designed by my favorite designing duo, Kramer and Kiesling, and I think that this is one of their real gems. This is a game that I think is somewhat relatively complex on the scale of all the Spiel des Jahres winners. Like I said, it plays in about an hour and a half, and it does have an open-ended structure, whereas many of the Spiel des Jahres winners give you very few choices. This one gives you a whole menu of choices, gives you 10 action points to spend on that menu, and lets you run amok. So for some players, that basically induces what's called analysis paralysis, where they don't know what the best move is, so they take a very long time to decide what to do during a turn. And if you know players like that, you might want to play your first game with them in a smaller player count, like with a 2 or 3 player game, just to keep the game length to be manageable. But as a player will play this game more, the best moves become more obvious, and that factor goes down considerably, I find. I will say that the game, because of its open-ended structure, does give you a lot of strategic depth, and it does give you a lot of options on your turn. Because it's an area majority game as well, you often will do best in the game by just moving off into your own direction and hoping that other players aren't tempted to come near you. And the tile placement, where each tile has a number of steps on it, does allow you to manipulate that. If you make it very expensive to get to a given temple and have a worker there, that could be the thing that keeps other players from swarming in there, which will allow you to build it up and have it score more points during those scorings. Also, by placing your tent out in the far reaches of the map, you'll have an advantage to swoop into new tiles as they come out, and that's something not to be underestimated either. So the game definitely has a lot of room for different strategies, and it's a game that you could almost ignore the area majority aspect of it and just focus on racing to collect those tiles and do pretty well at the game as well. So it's an open-ended game in the best sense of the word, and it's one that I think definitely rewards repeated plays, and it's one that I think that players are going to be able to develop more increasingly sophisticated strategies as they play more times, which is, I think, terrific. Although the game does have a relatively steep learning curve, again, only by the standards of the Spiel des Jahres award, not by the standards of most games. It's not that complex. I don't want to oversell it on that ground. It does reward repeated play. And it's, just, I think, a very captivating theme, and it has relatively streamlined play mechanics. So it's one of my favorite winners of the award, one that I would definitely recommend that every board gamer try at least once. It definitely holds up over 15 years later. So those are my thoughts on Tikal, and thanks for watching.